Good afternoon, everybody. So we're here today outside the Senate chamber before we ultimately take a vote on what is going to be optimally the governor's re-election fund, because that's really what this has become. I'm standing next to someone I greatly respect, out of everybody I greatly respect, but one person in particular is House Minority Leader Vincent Candelora, in that he worked and structured in a bipartisan fashion to create this fund to offset federal cuts. And he worked in good faith with Democratic leadership and the governor's office to create this fund to address potential federal cuts from being offset. But the key component to all of that was it was going to end today. And today wasn't a magical made-up date. Today is the first day of the legislative session. And what Representative Candelora and many of his Republican colleagues looked at it with is the fact that today we come back into session and we can appropriate directly as a legislature who holds the purse strings for this state to pay for anything that we believe we need to offset with state dollars that are being cut federally, not the governor. And I just find it ironic that the party that champions the No Kings rallies and No Kings efforts is the same exact party now that is allowing one man to be king with an additional $500 million in an election year. It's wrong to utilize these crises in a political fashion in which they have here. And really, this is nothing more than a guise to give $500 million to a governor running for re-election and also to outspend the spending cap once again, which Democrats crave to do year after year after year. And it's just not lost on me that every single year it's the Republicans that are the ones fighting to keep any level of fiscal sustainability here in this state.
Yeah, good afternoon. I share those sentiments. Today, the Senate and tomorrow the House will be taking up a vote which is essentially punting our job as legislators to appropriate state funds for our initiatives, what the residents of Connecticut want us to do. $330 million is going to be given to the governor, as Senator Harding has said. The governor could sprinkle money around to any initiatives he so chooses behind closed doors. There's no public hearings, there's no transparency, there's no ability for the legislature to weigh in unless you happen to have the governor's phone number. That is not how democracy is supposed to work. Connecticut should have learned its lesson with the fraud, waste, and abuse that we have seen coming out of this government over the last couple of years. And now they are just going to give additional money for the governor to allocate without any legislative oversight. We are back in session today on February 4th. That is why the original fund was supposed to expire, because we are the ones that should be making the decisions of what federal cuts, if any, we should be filling. We should not be punting it off to the governor. So we are standing in unison in opposition to this proposal today.
It's a sad day in the Constitution state when one man is given the power singularly to spend $500 million himself. The promises continue to be broken by this governor and the Democratic supermajority in the legislature, which on one hand praise the budget guardrails as necessary to protect taxpayers and the next day break them. One day promising that the special powers to spend money that this governor was given are only temporary until the legislature goes back into session, and the next day extends those powers for one man to spend hundreds of millions of dollars without sufficient checks past the beginning of the legislative session. We as legislators were elected to exercise our constitutional powers on behalf of our residents and constituents, on behalf of taxpayers, to ensure that every single public dollar that our constituents worked hard for is carefully spent with oversight, with checks and balances. Today we are saying that that constitutional design meant to protect our constituents and our hardworking taxpayers do not matter anymore. That one man can be allowed to spend $500 million without checks from our elected legislators. This is not what we should be allowing in the Constitution state. This is an election year gimmick. It represents failed leadership in a state that has become the most unaffordable in the entire country. We will stand up for our constituents, our taxpayers, and our Constitution today against this unreasonable power grab.
I just want to remind everyone that this fund was created when we were in a government shutdown, okay? We came in here, many of us believed that we needed to set aside some money for federal cuts. Well, guess what? Not only did the government reopen last year, the government also reopened yesterday. So the need to keep this money in an account is unnecessary, okay? The taxpayers entrust us with their tax dollars to make sure, as Senator Fazio said, that we are good stewards of their tax dollars. We made a promise to people that we would be, you know, kind of their safety net if the government shut down to a certain extent. But now we know that the government is open throughout the foreseeable future. So the need for this fund goes away. So today we're calling on our friends on the other side of the aisle to realize that one person should not have sole control over this fund, that the emergency does not exist any longer. The storm that was supposed to come kind of like missed us. So at this point in time, we should not extend this into the year. And by the way, when we're talking about the fiscal guardrails, something that I voted for and many of my colleagues standing behind me voted for, okay? When we're talking about those fiscal guardrails, we are going back on our promise to the Connecticut taxpayers by again raiding the fiscal guardrails. That is dangerous. We saw ourselves in budget deficit after budget deficit leading up to 2017. We don't want to go back to those days.
Okay, with that said, we can open up to any questions you may have. I guess we were so good, we convinced you. Okay. We all expect you to be asking everybody to vote no then. Thank you. Yeah.
Senator Gordon, I have a question for you. So in the budget, Governor Lamont has proposed disbanding OHS and moving its functions to other agencies. I know that's been an area of reform that you've been focused on. What do you think about that?
I think it's long overdue. We had massively failed leadership by former Commissioner Gifford, who drove OHS in a wrong direction and sanctioned closing of women's health, for example, inpatient labor and delivery. It's about time we took Office of Health Strategy, cut it down to size to what it's supposed to be, which is protecting patient care, protecting healthcare jobs. And yes, we should get rid of that. We can save a lot of money, and we can move some of that into the Department of Public Health, which is where it should be. And I hope the governor listens to legislation that myself, I know Senator Fazio, Senator Summers, and others have been championing, which is many times get the government out of the way and focus on when it really should be, which is making certain we're not cutting back on patient care services. So this is a step in the right direction, and I look forward to some upcoming meetings with the governor and his staff about it.
And the certificate of need process, as I understand it, is still going to exist according to DEH. So can we expect more proposals from you on how to reform that process?
Oh, absolutely. We already have proposals in. Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.